the utility or the lack of utility of these negative, I'm just going to put that in quotation marks, negative thoughts. And this tendency for our society to just lean on the side of positivity all the time and always try and be in that positive space, to always try and be happy. Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Becc.
And I am Christine Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Dr. Becc is a mindset coach and medical doctor who specialises in liberating driven professional women from the limitations of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and people pleasing. She's basically the cheat code for getting out of your own way, showing up authentically, and living a life you're proud of.
And Christine is a medical educator and nephrologist who creates resources for doctors in training that I truly think are an unfair advantage. She makes complex topics super simple and takes the pain and uncertainty out of passing your medical exams. Christine and I connected a few years ago via our online platforms, and over the years we've discussed countless highs, lows, and in-betweens of doctor life. And in doing so, we've experienced firsthand the power of vulnerable conversations to show us where we're getting in our own way and underestimating our capacity.
So we want you to be part of the conversation and experience these same results. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors.
All right. Well, hello there, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to another episode of the potty.
And we are going to be talking about something just so inspired. To be honest, I feel like a bit of a fraud saying this topic because I feel like I only just had it explained to me. But we are going to talk about the productive impact of self-validation, which will make sense once we pick Beck's brain. So the reason that we're talking about this today is because, just to be super vulnerable, last week I actually had a coaching session with Becc one-on-one. So you guys being on Beck's audience, I imagine you know that she is a mindset coach, and she does one-on-one at time, and she's obviously got a group program coming up where she does coaching as well. So I've experienced coaching with Becc before, but I had a particular problem last week that came up in life, and I obviously don't want to go into all of the nitty-gritty details of it, but the sort of essence of it was that things are going well. Things are going really well in terms of building the vision board, building my business, my education business, my YouTube, my ducklings and my programs. Like, everything's going so well. I'm living my best life. But equally, as I do that, there was something that had come up that made me feel as if I could lose it all. Like, all of this could vanish. And then where would I be? Who would I be? So that kind of scenario, and look, even talking about it, I'm getting like triggered. but Becc helped me unpack this last week, and it was so healing, and it was so beautiful. And I think it's a scenario that a lot of us can relate to, that vulnerability of having something to hold and knowing that you have something to lose. It's a beautiful thing, but it's also very vulnerable. But as Becc was helping me work through this problem, what she made me do was something I really didn't want to do, which was allow my negative thoughts to have airtime. So as we were working through this problem, I could come up with a lot of rational reasons for why I was feeling this way and what was going on in my head. But what I wasn't doing was giving any airtime to all of my biggest fears. Like, I wouldn't let them come up. Like, I just wouldn't acknowledge them. I didn't want to hear them. I just wanted to be like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, just, I don't want to listen to that. Like, I want to focus on the positive. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's something we can all relate to. But Becc made me focus on those negative things for just a tick, bring them up. She described it as giving the ugly thoughts. I want all the ugly thoughts. So, I gave her all the ugly thoughts, but there was something about bringing them up and hearing them out that actually was very soothing and helpful. And I think I thought, maybe as someone who's always got a bit of a positive slant on things, I work hard to be positive. I work at it. It doesn't happen completely naturally. And I think I've got a bad relationship with negative thoughts, and I don't find them useful. So what we're going to talk about today, sorry, I haven't given you a chance to explain all that yet, Becc, but what we're going to talk about today is this concept that Becc was explaining to me about the role of those negative thoughts. And she gives this amazing analogy about you being the CEO and having a boardroom. So that's the context. That's why we're talking about it today. And I know you're going to get a lot out of this for those of you who are listening. So, Becc, tell us about this productive impact of self-validation, the CEO, the boardroom. What's this all about?
Thank you so much, Christine. And I am so excited to speak about this concept because it is so common for the type of people that I coach who have the classic successful woman problems of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and people pleasing. And all of them would describe themselves and find themselves, and other people would describe them as highly positive people as well. And I know that that was a lot of what was kind of actually getting in your way here in this case too. Your identity as a positive person and your want to use that positivity to drive your decisions. So I just think not only is this problem so common and so useful to talk about, but it's born from a beautiful place and a beautiful integrity and the best intentions to create the most positive impact in the world, the greatest good in the world. And so as much as the experience can be very challenging and we can sort of feel like we're doing it wrong and something's going wrong and we're going in the wrong direction by looking at these negative things, and that can sort of feel out of integrity. I can't emphasize enough how common this problem is and what a beautiful place it comes from. So I'm never ever worried when people present these challenges to me and when people find this to be a barrier. It never indicates a problem to me. And from my perspective, it's just a common misconception about the utility or the lack of utility of these negative, I'm just going to put that in quotation marks, negative thoughts. And this tendency for our society to just lean on the side of positivity all the time and always try and be in that positive space, to always try and be happy. And I mean, Christine, you know better than anybody the benefits of being a positive person. And for Christine, you don't need to look any further than her to see the amazing things that you can create in your life when you are such a positive person and you have such a positive outlook. And for people like us who are on the side of positivity and have that in our integrity, we can also have this challenge, this barrier that comes up for us, which is dismissing and ignoring, resisting any of those negative thoughts that don't fit into our integrity, that don't feel like they're useful to us, and that we already know we don't want to influence our next decision and our next action. So I know you said that you felt like a fraud talking about this topic and introducing this topic, but to be honest, Christine, you are already a pro at it, in the sense that there are so many of us who are not even willing to go into that space, and having had that experience yourself of going into that space because you were willing to do it says so much about your trust in yourself, your trust in your true positive nature, your trust in your actual intentions, how you're going to treat yourself, how you're going to make decisions into the future. Because a lot of the reason why we don't want to see those negative thoughts in the first place is because we don't trust ourselves to see them and not go into a spiral. A lot of us believe that if we give those thoughts more airtime, that it will derail us on our path. And we are going to talk about this concept today because I want you guys to all see the other side of that, which is what I see to be more commonly true, which is when we bring up those negative thoughts and we give them airtime, it only frees us up to weigh the pros and cons of our mind more completeness, and to be able to make a more integrous decision with all of that information that our mind is offering. So we called it self-validation. We've called this episode this concept is about the productive impact of self-validation. And we should start with clarifying what self-validation means, because it means different things to different people. So in this case, we're talking about validation
as just being acknowledging your experience, i.e., your thoughts and emotions, just to simplify our experience down to those two broad categories. So when we say self-validation here, it's literally acknowledging your personal experience. The thoughts that you're having, they are in the reality of your mind right now. You're experiencing those thoughts and the emotions that you're having. That's another component of self-validation that we're probably not going to get into today, but it has the same benefits as validating your thoughts, as we'll talk about today. Importantly, this is not saying self-validation or validating your thoughts is not the same as agreeing or acknowledging your thoughts as being true. We bring up these thoughts and we acknowledge the reality that they're in their mind. That's the validation. But we don't necessarily agree, or by doing that, we're not agreeing that we believe these thoughts, let alone that we will obey these thoughts and act them out. And the benefit is when you bring up those thoughts, when you validate those thoughts being in your mind, then you get to see the reason behind it. Then you get to see how your brain came to this conclusion of this thought. You can think about, say, I like to say that the thoughts that we have are like the conclusions on research papers. So we just go around like reading the conclusions. I don't know about you, but I'll read like the abstract and the conclusion of a study. And I very rarely I will do like a journal club level analysis. And that's what our mind does too. Our mind just carries around the conclusions, the abstracts from the study. Let's say the conclusions. But when we get a little bit of a red flag, or when we think we're going to take that conclusion and use it in a meaningful way, it's often useful to go and look at how that conclusion was drawn, i.e. the reasoning behind it. We want to go and look at the paper and see if it's actually built with sturdy methods, robust research design. And so when you bring up your thought, when you validate that ugly, nasty little thought that you would rather squash down and never see again in your life, when you bring that up, when you bring up that conclusion, you can look at the reasons behind it. And that's the other part of validation. You can make sense of how your mind got there. You can see the reasons behind it. And while validating, I see how you got there. I understand how you came to that conclusion. We can also deem that paper invalid in terms of its factual nature, in terms of the conclusion that it drew from the data, in terms of the utility or even the contextual importance of that conclusion in this case. So that second level of validation, where you say, I see the reasoning behind that, I understand the reasons that led to that conclusion, that validation step can be the next useful self-validation. And again, it doesn't mean that we're accepting the thought and the reasons as true, but instead you notice that when you get a chance to go and look back at the paper, you can actually do the opposite in many cases and say, I can actually see how this conclusion is not true in so many different ways. So that's a big explanation of the many components of self-validation that I'm sure you've never given much thought to. A lot of people will think that self-validation is kind of giving yourself a hug or telling yourself that you did a good job. But self-validation is important for all kinds of different thoughts and contexts. And to me, it's a critical component of building self-trust, which in itself is a critical component of being empowered, not being disempowered, living an empowered life where you get to self-govern and make those decisions that are most integrous. So thank you so much for bringing up this topic today. I cannot wait to give this out to everybody who's currently dismissing themselves and trying to push down all of their concerns and just get on with being positive or being productive, because self-validation is highly productive, as you experienced so courageously.
What you were saying there was you can see these thoughts and how you get there, but something else you did in the session with me was like, what do you think that thought's trying to tell you? So not just where the thought ended up and the sort of footnote of the thought, And you could see the rationale of getting there, but there was also this like, why is it there? This is a warning sign for you. This is something that is useful to you. And then you were able to show me obviously how the thought came to be, but also why it was there. And then once I understood why it was there, then I was much more at peace, because I was like, oh great, it's come to warn me about something. And when you gave us your little boardroom analogy, please share with the audience the boardroom analogies. I thought this was just wonderful. When you said this to me after the session, it really clicked for me. And it felt like exactly what had happened in the session. So tell us about your boardroom analogy.
So the boardroom analogy is, I think, a really useful way for us to think about the thoughts that arise in our mind, because it's not uncommon for us to have completely conflicting, contradictory thoughts in our mind at once. You know, I want to keep doing this and I should stop doing this, for example. Or I don't want to and I do want to. That's just a complete, beautiful, reciprocal opposite. So I like to first acknowledge the contradictory nature of our mind and the fact that that's normal, because a lot of us think that our mind works in this beautiful, logical thought sequence where 1 + 1 = 2 and nothing else can be true. That's the end of the story. But instead, our mind is capable and will constantly be challenging us with conflicting ideas. Now, it's not that you're just confused or conflicted as a person, or you don't know what you want, but it's really useful to help us understand that our mind is just taking all these different perspectives of the situation that we're looking at, the information that we're presented with. And I like to think about these different perspectives as a board of directors. So why do we elect a board of directors in a business? This has come about for many different reasons in business, but one of the primary advantages that I see in having a board is that on the board, each of the different board members that you elect will have different strengths. They will be selected to be on the board for a reason. So you don't just have clones of happy Christine, happy Christine, happy Christine, happy Christine, happy Christine in all of the 8 seats, right? That's not what the stakeholders, what the shareholders, what the managerial side of the business want in a board. They want a board who's able to see things, who's able to see the challenges and the trajectory of the business from multiple different and diverse perspectives. So you'll have someone on the board who has a background in law. You'll have somebody on the board who has, say, an insurance background. You'll have somebody on the board who's got a marketing background. You'll fill up your board with people who can offer different experiences and perspectives for the purpose of making great collective decisions for the company. And this is what I think our mind does for us as well. So for me, I still have this, it's a common misconception that because I am a coach, that my brain is perfect and I always act in integrity, and that I never suffer with perfectionism or imposter syndrome or people pleasing. And I will be the first to shout from the rooftop, guys, these remain challenges in my life. And I'll tell you why. Because I have a human brain. So that's not going away anytime soon. As long as I'm alive, I will have these challenges. Now, that's not to say that there's nothing to gain from doing this work. I have so much more ability to self-govern. I have so much more choice and control in my life. And I get to up-level in an exponential way because I'm learning new patterns every time, every moment that I do this work. I learn new patterns, I solidify new patterns, and they become things that I don't have to think about anymore, so I can move on to the next thing. But the challenges of life will keep coming. So anyway, with this board, I have somebody who sits on the board in my mind who's very concerned for, let's say, my safety, my sense of belonging, let's say my social safety. And whenever I go to give a public speaking event, this board member gets very upset. They're like, whoa, wait a minute. You guys are all celebrating. You're all excited because this is a great opportunity and you're going to go and change the world and everybody needs to hear these ideas and everybody's going to be better for it. And they're like, bang, bang, bang on the table, standing up, shush, stop celebrating. This is a problem, guys. We cannot do this public speaking event. You are going to embarrass yourself. You're going to offend people. You're going to get people offside. People are going to misunderstand you. People are going to, I don't know, think you're crazy. They have a whole list that they've written down about why I shouldn't do this public speaking event. And that's because they're my expert in safety and belonging. They're the people who are like, we've been burned before. We have experience in this when you go and put yourself out there and when you go and have different opinions. And in our experience, we perceive that there's a significant threat here and that things can go very wrong if you let yourself do this. So yes, I see the benefits of you going to speak, but in my professional opinion, I'd recommend you don't. And this is what happens when we don't self-validate. So imagine that was a member of my board who I had elected because I want somebody on my board to steer my company, as in me as a person, I'm the company. I want someone to help me and to notify me when my social belonging is being threatened. I want somebody to keep me alert to that threat in my life and let me know. So I've elected this person. I want them on my board. And in this case, me, the CEO or the chair, whoever ultimately makes the decisions, I'm actually not on a board. I might be totally fumbling this analogy, but let's just say I'm the CEO and I make the decisions. So ultimately, it comes back to me in my decision, and I think it's the chair. Anyway, the other members of the board and me, we say, don't be ridiculous. Sit down. We don't want to hear about it. Can you just be quiet? Can you just not mention it again? Right? That's how I treat this board member when I'm trying to just be positive. When I'm like, no, guys, we've already decided as a team that we're going to do this talk. We already know what we're going to talk about. We've decided it's important. It's aligned with our integrity. We're going to do it. Okay. So I know that you want to stand up and say, like, there are all these things that are going to go wrong and this is a risk and da, 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 but I don't even want to hear it because we've already decided we're doing it. Okay. This is how most of us treat our fears, our negative thoughts as they come up, whether they're anything from being a threat to your sense of social belonging and safety, or whether they're anything from like, I don't know, or you might, something small in your life. When we've already kind of made this executive decision to stay on a predetermined path, and we dismiss and ignore and resist and try and quiet this member of our board who we've elected, now we have to move forwards without that board member being on board. So we're at least a man down in our adventure. But what else happens? Not only do we not have everyone on board for the company's mission as manpower to move forwards, as manpower to execute on this mission that we've decided to go on, but this board member, remember, they're actually there for a reason. They've got personal experience and expertise, and they are genuinely concerned about the safety of the company. They're genuinely concerned about the prosperity of the company and how this is going to affect our ongoing success and existence. So what do you expect that board member to do when they've got genuine concerns and they've just been dismissed? Their concerns haven't been heard out.
Oh, they're going to get louder. I was just thinking they'll hit the sympathetic nervous system button, which is exactly what that person does to me.
Yes, hit the panic button, the SNS button. Totally. Yes. And okay, can we just take a minute and think about just coming from the sense of like, they're doing their job. They're concerned about the company's safety and prosperity. Would we want our board member to do anything less than be louder if they were dismissed about these very real threats?
Yeah, it's so true. This is why I love this analogy, because it just makes me really appreciate that part of myself, of ourselves. They do a great job. Panic! it down.
Red button.
I'm sorry, I'm having flashbacks to like singing Sarah McLachlan one time. Anyway, carry on. We were definitely hitting the panic button that day. Anyway.
I'm sorry if I'm prompting flashbacks to everybody's public speaking, public musician being events.
Sorry, Beck. Continue.
So, from my perspective, it's reasonable. And in fact, it's wanted that my board member here is not accepting the fact that they're silenced. And I guess now's a good time to just mention as well, if dismissing that board member, say it does make them quiet or go away, perhaps, they were dismissed as not being important, or that concern not being important, whether that was right or wrong. But then your brain has time, that board member has time to go away and think about it. And they're like, oh, no, I'm actually not concerned. I think I was quote, overreacting, maybe misinterpreted the situation wrong, but that fear wasn't actually very relevant. That concern wasn't very relevant. So I'm just going to put that to the side now, and I'm going to jump back on board with the board and move towards this shared goal. That is hopefully what happens in some of the cases when we dismiss ourselves or push our fears to the side. And that's certainly, I think, what we hope will happen, that we just dismiss the fears and that they will have turned out to be not relevant and kind of on incorrect premises, and then they will never return. But in a lot of cases, our fears have concerning premises such that this board member will not only not be on board to help the company with the mission, but they might even try to undermine the mission in other ways if they're genuinely concerned. Again, for the best thing for the whole company, they might try and get in the ears of the other board members and be like, hey, I know you're excited. And also, nobody's considered this concern. Nobody's considered this problem. Will you talk about this problem with me? Will you think about this problem with me? Will you mitigate this problem with me? Or will you help me shut down this mission? And suddenly you can have this board member who is causing the whole team to disjoin. They're causing the whole team chaos and a lack of coordination and cooperation. And I think that's the worst case of what can happen when we dismiss our fears, but the fears feel important to us. There's a part of us, there's this board member who's like, no, this is a real problem. This hasn't been seen. We are not safe when we move forwards. So we will self-sabotage. We will undermine all the other board members, and we will pull ourselves back on this mission that we wanted to go on. And again, I want us to appreciate how understandable it is that your mind would do that to you if you feel unsafe, if you have a board member who's worried about your safety. So the other side of this is, that's the dismissing side. And I want you guys to think about the utility of actually addressing that board member, of what would actually happen if you took 5 to 10 minutes to have a respectful, honorable conversation, a professional conversation that you would have with a respected colleague, somebody who you would elect for your board, no less. And how, if they had concerns, if you sat down to hear them out, what that impact would be for your board and your company as a whole. Because I think a lot of our concerns are when we hear the thoughts, if we let ourselves hear these negative thoughts, that we will either believe them or obey them. We think that if we let them take up more airtime, we will start believing those thoughts more, or once we see them, we'll have to action them, as we'll act as if they're true. But if you think about having this conversation with this board member, you as the chair or the CEO, you're just hearing this perspective. And then you integrate that perspective with the rest of the board's perspective and with your goals, your integrity, and your risk tolerance as a company. You don't just take that one thought, that one piece of data, that one perspective from one board member, and then let it be your whole perspective. And this is what happens with our minds too, when we can be in that beautiful, observing and open-minded place that you can get to with coaching, that you can learn to get yourself into. So this is the benefit of self-validating. This right here is self-validating. When you sit down with that board member and their concerns and you hear them without allowing yourself to simply believe or obey their concerns, but you hear those concerns in a way that incorporates them into your full company perspective. This is what I almost always see automatically happens with my clients. I say almost because even for me, sometimes I do bring up my thoughts and I just get completely fused with them. I see these thoughts and I only feel worse and worse as I see these fears, right? And I do believe them automatically, and I believe that I need to obey them. I believe that I need to do something about it. I've taken the conclusion of the study and I've just taken it at face value. And I want you guys to be prepared for that to happen. And again, it's another level of awareness where you step back and you see yourself doing that and you hold the space for you to do that in that moment. That's a moment of time where you're getting more and more entangled, but that's not an irrecoverable place either. Sometimes that is just what is real for us. Sometimes that's just how that thought affects us, and that's not irrecoverable. And we still have somewhere to go next from there. So yes, it is a risk and it can happen. It happens to me still too. And also it's still progress. It's still better than invalidating the thought, than dismissing the thought, than rejecting the board member and letting them just be on their own with their concerns, in my opinion. So that is the analogy for how productive it can be to self-validate. When you validate that board member's concerns, you can see how it reunites the board in a way that is not necessarily or definitely biasing towards one strong board member's opinion or strong feelings about a situation. But we're always just trying to see all the information that's happening in our mind, all the conflicting and different perspectives, even if they're very uncomfortable, so that we can take them under advisement. And as you've mentioned, Christine, it can be so liberating to and useful to hear the reasons behind those board members' perspectives, because as you go and understand why they have that perspective, not only can you see that the perspective is often flawed in its premises, it has some flawed errors in it, and maybe it's not actually, although it's creating fear, it's not actually something that is genuinely a threat. But also you can see how that board member, while it sort of felt like they were working against you, they were saying, no, don't go ahead with this plan. We don't like this plan. It feels like they're against you in that moment. But as you said, you get to see as well how they're trying to help you, how they're doing the job they were recruited to do. And that's that element of self-trust that you get when you can give all of your board members airtime instead of rejecting their genuine and sometimes useful concerns.
Yeah, and it's so powerful. And I loved that sort of, even when you were saying there about how sometimes when you do look at your thoughts and it still feels like overwhelming and there's a lot going on, I think it's also great. It still works with your analogy to be like, I don't think it's easy to be the CEO. Like, I don't think it's easy to sit in that chair and hear all this stuff sometimes. Like, I think just to normalize that, I think like it's okay to take a breath when you do see all these perspectives. But I guess just to sort of close the loop on the story of where we started, where you were coaching me, what I found was that when I gave that board member the airtime, they never came back to see me. They just wanted to be heard. They're like, great, got the memo, and then they have completely disappeared. I haven't had any more spiraling or that kind of anxious feeling. I just feel completely put back together and back on track. And I am sure I will encounter them again, but I feel like it was just beautiful. It's like, it's just what that part of me needed, was just to be heard. That's it. It was so easy once you did it to me. And so I just think it's a beautiful gift to give. And I guess, people always know where to find you if they want to learn more about getting coached and things. But I think even just if you are journaling away, just allowing yourself to have all that out on paper, see yourself as the CEO, you're in charge of the company, you're driving the ship, take everything into account and yeah, make a measured decision from there. Yeah.
Perfect. I think people often try and simplify coaching down to just change your thoughts. That's what people often, even when I'm on consults, when I'm trying to explain coaching as a process and a practice, people are like, wait, I'm just trying to understand it. So we're just changing our thoughts. That's it. We just need to change our thoughts to be more useful. And the answer is yes. Like that is ultimately what we're doing. But the process of getting there is so much more skillful. And it is a practice that you have to do not only, or that you can do if you want to do it, not only, as a once and done thing, but you pick out the moments where you need it. And being able to recognize that you're somebody who will self-reject and dismiss yourself and not self-validate is a part of that process in itself, to be able to pick up the times in your life where you're doing that. And then as a positive person, as somebody who identifies as being very productive and just wanting to move forwards and look on the bright side all the time, wanting to just change your thoughts to be more positive often doesn't work for this reason. We wouldn't survive if we were just positive creatures. If we didn't have those other board members, the company would be down in is it the black or the red?
It would be in a bit of trouble. Yeah, like if it was just like positive lemmings, just like thumbs up to everything. Yeah.
Right.
Right. It would be a disaster.
Yeah, it's not actually what we want. And I adore these people. And my favorite people are the people who are so positive and have, those board members for them are clearly so loud with that positive perspective. And they really listen to those board members who have that outlook. They're my favorite people to be around, because I think my brain tends to the negative, and to have people around me like that, it's such a beautiful influence for me, because that positive perspective, like your perspective, Christine, is just so enhancing in my life. And I also need to acknowledge for myself that I have a lot of negative thoughts. And even with all the work I've done, and I'm starting to understand in the last couple of years when I felt really solid in my mind management skills, that those negative thoughts will never go away. They're always going to be there, and they're there for a reason. Sometimes they're misunderstanding the situation and they're hitting the panic button unnecessarily. A lot of the time they are. However, I'm never expecting them to go away. But what I am expecting to do is become a stronger and more trustworthy and more collaborative and continuously integrity and direction focused CEO. That's my job now, with all of my board members, with all of my thoughts that are always coming to challenge me and interpreting things in different ways with all their different experiences. My job is just to be the best CEO here with this crazy human brain that I have. And it's these decisions that we make that change the trajectory of our life and our company. And, the fact that you're the kind of CEO, Christine, who would take the time to hear out that board member, and then for that board member to mention their concerns and then leave it with you, then never come back to you to be like, just following up to make sure you actually took this under consideration. That board member trusts you. You have this sense of self-trust that you've built in with your thoughts. You've heard that thought, and that part of you trusts you to deal with that as the CEO who's going to keep the company on track. And so I just want to say, I feel like that is it's nothing wrong with you if that doesn't happen that way for you, if it doesn't happen all the time. But to me, that's how I see that outcome as playing out for you. The concern was heard and they had full trust in you as a CEO. Like, you have full trust in yourself to use that information and not take it for granted, not neglect it again.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And as you're talking, I'm starting to build these little pictures and characters in my head. I think it's just the way my brain works. I'm starting to build this whole scene, and I want to get to know each and every board member now. I think these people will be great to hang out with in my future.
I've got that board member in my head that's worried about my sense of belonging. That's like, you're sounding a little bit crazy right now. Who are all these little people in your brain?
No, I'm totally there for it. I will like animate them. We'll give them like a cartoon in no time.
Yes, I'm picturing your animations.
Yeah, little people. Yeah, that's how my brain works. But on a serious note, I think this is a life hack and a game changer. And it's the kind of concept that once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Like, this concept is so useful to me, and I'm sure to many people listening. So thank you. As your own concept, which always really impresses me. I always tell Becc I think she's the next Brene Brown. So I can't wait for her to write her book and take me on tour as some kind of tokenistic person to have on tour with her. So that's going to be great in our future. But no, thank you so much, Becc. And thank you all so much for listening to the poddy. We love hanging out with you here. And if you have any comments or want to give us any emojis, you can drop them in the comments below. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
I've been waiting all my life for something. I've been down the darkest roads and up